Good morning, YouTube. It's CN Maritime History here, back again with another video. And today I am going to talk about the famous Spanish Armada. Let's begin with some background information. King Henry VIII began the English Reformation as a political exercise over his desire to divorce his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. Over time, England became increasingly aligned with the Protestant Reformation taking place in Europe, especially during the reign of Henry's son, Edward VI. Edward died childless, and his half-sister Mary ascended the throne in 1553. Mary and her husband Philip II of Spain began to reassert Roman Catholic influence over church affairs. Her attempts led to more than 260 people being burned at the stake, earning her the nickname Bloody Mary. Mary's death in 1558 led to her half-sister Elizabeth taking the throne. Unlike Mary, Elizabeth was firmly in the reformist camp and quickly re-implemented many of Edward's reforms. Philip, no longer co-monarch, deemed Elizabeth a heretic and a non-legitimate ruler of England. In the eyes of the Catholic Church, Henry had never officially divorced Catherine, making Elizabeth a non-legitimate claim to the throne. It is alleged that Philip supported plots to have Elizabeth overthrown in favor of her Catholic cousin and her presumptive Mary Queen of Scots. These plans were thwarted when Elizabeth had Mary imprisoned in 1567. Mary was forced to abdicate the crown of Scotland in favor of her son, James VI. Elizabeth was forced to have Mary executed. And finally, in 1587, due to constant plots against Elizabeth carried out in Mary's name, Elizabeth also retaliated against Philip by supporting the Dutch revolt against Spain, as well as funding privateers to raid Spanish ships across the Atlantic. She had also negotiated an enduring trade and a political alliance with Morocco. In retaliation, Philip planned an expedition to invade England in order to overthrow Elizabeth, and if the Armada was not entirely successful, at least negotiate freedom of worship for Catholics and financial compensation for war in the Low Countries. Though, through this endeavor, English material support for the United Provinces, which is the part of the Low Countries that had successfully seceded from Spanish rule, and English attacks on Spanish trading settlements in the New World would end. Philip was supported by Pope Sixtus V, who treated the invasion as a crusade, with the promise of a subsidy that should the Armada make land. Substantial support for the invasion was also expected from English Catholics, including wealthy and influential aristocrats and traders. A raid on Cadiz led by privateer Francis Drake in April 1587 had captured or destroyed about 30 ships in great quantities of supplies, setting preparations back by a year. There is also evidence that a letter from Elizabeth's security chief and spy master Sir Francis Walsingham to her ambassador in Istanbul, William Harbone, sought to initiate Ottoman Empire fleet maneuvers to harass the Spaniards, but there is no evidence for the success of that plan. Philip initially favored a triple attack, starting with a diversionary raid on Scotland, while the main armada would capture either the Isle of Wight or Southampton, these are both in Ireland if you do not know, to establish a safe anchorage in the Solent. The Duke of Parma would then follow with a large army from the Low Countries crossing the English Channel. The Duke of Parma was uneasy about mounting such an invasion without any possibility of surprise. The appointed commander of the Armada was the highly experienced Alvaro de Bazan, Marquis of Santa Cruz, but he died in February 1588, and the Duke of Medina Sidonia, a high-born courtier, took his place. While a competent soldier and distinguished administrator, Medina Sidonia had no naval experience. He wrote to Philip expressing grave doubts about the planned campaign, but his message was prevented from reaching the king by courtiers on the grounds that God would ensure the Armada's success. Prior to the undertaking, Pope Sixtus V allowed Philip to collect crusade taxes and grant his men indulgences. The blessing of the Armada's banner on April 25, 1588 was similar to the ceremony used prior to the Battle of Lepanto in 1571. On May 28, 1588, the Armada set sail from Lisbon and headed the English Channel. Now, you can see the Armada here in this painting. That's what is believed to have looked like. However, there are no photographs, so obviously we really don't know. The fleet of the Armada was composed of 130 ships, 8,000 sailors, and 18,000 soldiers, and bore 1,500 brass guns and 1,000 iron guns. The full body of the fleet took 2 days to leave port. It included 28 purpose-built warships, of which 20 were galleons, 4 were galleys, and 4 were Neapolitan galleasses. The remaining heavy vessels were mostly armed carracks and hulks, along with 34 light ships. In the Spanish Netherlands, 30,000 soldiers awaited the arrival of the Armada, the plan being to use the cover of the warships to convey the army on barges to a place near London. In all, 55,000 men were to have been mustered, a huge army for that point in time. On the day the Armada set sail, Elizabeth's ambassador in the Netherlands, Valentine Dale, met Parma's representatives in peace negotiations. The English made a vain effort to intercept the Armada in the Bay of Biscay. On July the 6th, negotiations were abandoned and the English fleet stood prepared, however ill-supplied, at Plymouth, awaiting news of Spanish movements. The English fleet outnumbered that of the Spanish 200 ships to 130, while the Spanish fleet outgunned that of the English. The Spanish available firepower was 50% more than that of the English. The English fleet consisted of 34 ships of the Royal Fleet, 21 of which were galleons of 200 to 400 tons, and 163 other ships, 30 of which were of 200 to 400 tons and carried up to 42 guns each. 12 of the ships were privateers owned by Lord Howard of Effingham, Sir John Hawkins, and Sir Francis Drake. The Spanish Armada was delayed by bad weather. Storms in the Bay of Biscay forced four galleys and one galleon to turn back, and other ships had to be put in for repairs, leaving about 124 ships to actually make it to the English Channel. Nearly half of the fleet was not built as warships and was used for duties such as scouting and dispatch work, or for carrying supplies, animals, and troops. The fleet was was sighted in England on July 19th when it appeared off the Lizard in Cornwall. The news was conveyed to London by a system of beacons that had been constructed along the south coast. On July 19th, the English fleet was trapped in Plymouth Harbor by the incoming tide. The Spanish convened a council of war where it was proposed to ride into the harbor on the tide and incapacitate the defending ships at anchor. From Plymouth Harbor, the Spanish would attack England, but Philip explicitly forbade Medina Sidonia from engaging, leaving the Armada to sail on to the east and toward the Isle of Wight. As the tide turned, 55 English ships set out to confront the Armada from Plymouth under the command of Lord Howard of Effingham, with Sir Francis Drake as Vice Admiral. The rear admiral was Sir John Hawkins. On July the 20th, the English fleet was off Eddystone Rocks with the Armada upwind to the west. To execute its attack, the English tacked upward of the Armada, thus gaining the weather gauge, which is a significant advantage. At daybreak on July 21st, the English fleet engaged the Armada off Plymouth near the Eddystone Rocks. The Armada was in a crescent-shaped defensive formation convex toward the east. The galleons and great ships are concentrated in the center and at the tips of the crescent's horns, giving cover to the transports and supply ships in between. Opposing them, the English were in two sections, of Drake to the north and Revenge of 11 ships, and Howard to the south and Ark Royal with the bulk of the fleet. Given the Spanish advantage in close-quarter fighting, the English ships used their superior speed and maneuverability to keep beyond grappling range and bombarded the Spanish ships from a distance of cannon fire. The distance was too great for the maneuver to be effective, and at the end of the first day's fighting, neither fleet had lost a ship in action, although the Spanish carrack Rosario and galleon San Salvador were abandoned after they collided with each other. When night fell, Drake turned the ship back to loot the abandoned Spanish ships, capturing supplies of much-needed gunpowder and gold. Drake had been guiding the English fleet by means of a lantern which he snuffed out to slip away from the Spanish ships, causing the rest of his fleet to become scattered and disarrayed by dawn. The English ships again used their superior speed and maneuverability to catch up with the Spanish fleet after a day of sailing. The English fleet and the Armada engaged once more on July 23rd off Portland. A change of wind gave the Spanish the weather gauge, and they sought to close with the English, but were foiled by the smaller ships' greater maneuverability. At one point, Howard formed his ships into a line of battle to attack at close range, bringing all guns to bear, but he did not follow through with the maneuver, and little was achieved. If the Armada could create a temporary base in the protected waters of the Soul and a strait separating the Isle of Wight from the English mainland, it could wait there for word from Parma's army. However, in a full-scale attack, the English fleet broke into four groups, with Martin Frobisher of the ship Aid giving command over a squadron, and Drake coming with a large force from the south. Medina Sidonia sent reinforcements south and ordered the Armada back to open sea to avoid the Owers Shoals. There were no other secure harbors further east along England's south coast, so the Armada was compelled to make for Calais, without being able to wait for word of the Duke of Parma's army. Okay. Sorry, I lost my place in my script here. And if you heard that, that was just my cat. On July the 27th, the Armada anchored off Goliath in a tightly packed defensive crescent formation, not far from Dunkirk, where Parma's army, reduced by disease to 16,000, was expected to be waiting, ready to join the fleet in barges sent from ports along the Flemish coast. Communication was more difficult than anticipated, and word came too late that the Parma army had yet to be equipped with sufficient transport or to be assembled in port, a process that would take at least 6 days. As Medina Sidonia weighed at anchor, Dunkirk was blockaded by a Dutch fleet of 30 flyboats under Lieutenant Admiral Justinius von Nassau. Parma wanted the Armada to send its light pataches, I think that's how you say it, to drive away the Dutch, but Medina Sidonia would not send them because he feared he would need these ships for his own protection. There was no deep-water port where the fleet might shelter, which had been acknowledged as a major difficulty for the expedition, and the Spanish found themselves vulnerable as night drew on. The Dutch flyboats mainly operated in the shallow waters off Zeeland and Flanders, where larger warships of a deeper draught, like the Spanish and English galleons, could not safely enter. The Dutch enjoyed an unchallenged naval advantage in these waters, even though their navy was inferior in naval armament. An essential element of the plan of invasion, as it was eventually implemented, was the transportation of a large part of Parma's army on Flanders as the main invasion force in unarmed barges across the English Channel. These barges would be protected by the large ships of the Armada. However, to get to the Armada, they would have to cross the zone dominated by the Dutch Navy, where the Armada couldn't go. This problem seems to have been overlooked by the Spanish planners, but it was insurmountable. Because of this obstacle, England never was in any real danger, at least from the Duke of Parma and the Army of Flanders. Because of the eventual English victory at sea, the Army of Flanders escaped the drowning death von Nassau had in mind for them. At midnight on July 28th, the English set alight 8 fire ships, sacrificing warships by filling them with pitch, brimstone, gunpowder, and tar, and cast them downwind along closely anchored vessels of the Armada. The Spanish feared that these were uncommonly large fire ships of hellburners, specialized fire ships filled with large gunpowder charges that had been used to deadly effect at the siege of Antwerp. Two of these ships on fire were towed away, but the remainder bore down on the fleet. Medina Sidonia's flagship and the principal warships held their positions, but the rest of the fleet cut their anchor cables and scattered in confusion. No Spanish ships were burnt, but the crescent formation had been broken, and the fleet found itself too far leeward of Goliath in the rising southwesterly wind to recover its position. The English closed in for battle. On August 8, 1588, the Battle of Gravelines took place. The small port of Gravelines was part of Flanders in the Spanish Netherlands, close to the border with France. It was the closest Spanish territory to England. Medina Sidonia tried to regather his fleet there and was reluctant to sail further east, knowing the danger from the shoals off Flanders from which his Dutch enemies had moved the sea marks. The English learned of the Armada's weaknesses during the skirmishes in the English Channel and concluded it was possible to close to within 100 yards to penetrate the oak hulls of the Spanish ships. They had spent most of their gunpowder in the first engagements and had, after the Isle of Wight, been forced to conserve their heavy shocking powder for an anticipated attack near Gravelines. During all the engagements, the Spanish heavy guns could not easily be reloaded because of their close spacing and the quantities of supplies stowed between decks, as Drake had discovered on capturing the damaged Nuestra Senora de Rosario in the Channel. Instead, the Spanish gunners fired once and then transferred to their main task, which was to board enemy ships, as had been the practice in naval warfare at that time. Evidence from Armada wrecks in Ireland shows that much of the fleet's ammunition was unused. Its determination to fight by boarding rather than employing cannon fire at a distance proved the weakness for the Spanish. The maneuver had been effective in the battles of Lepanto and Ponta Delgado earlier in the decade, but the English were aware of it and sought to avoid it by keeping their distance. With its superior maneuverability, the English fleet provoked Spanish fire while staying out of range. The English then closed, firing damaging broadsides on the enemy ships, which enabled them to maintain a windward position, so the heeling Armada hulls were exposed to damage below the waterline when they changed course later. Many of the Spanish gunners were killed or wounded by the English broadsides, and the task of manning the cannon often fell to foot soldiers who did not know how to operate them. The ships were close enough for sailors on the upper decks of the English and Spanish ships to exchange musket fire. After 8 hours, the English ships began to run out of ammunition, and some gunners began loading objects such as chains in the cannon. Around 4 p.m., the English fired their last shots and pulled back. 5 Spanish ships were lost. The galleasses, I think. San Lorenzo, which is the flagship of Don Hugo de Moncada, ran aground at Calais and was taken by Howard after murderous fighting between the crew, galley slaves, English, and the French. The galleons San Mateo and San Felipe drifted away in a sinking condition, ran aground on the island of Walcheren the next day and were taken by the Dutch. One carrack ran aground near Blankenberg and another foundered. Many other Spanish ships were severely damaged, especially the Portuguese and some Spanish Atlantic-class galleons, including some Neapolitan galleys which bore the brunt of the fighting during the early hours of the battle. The Spanish plan to join with Parma's army had been defeated. On the day after the Battle of Gravelines, the disorganized and unmaneuverable Spanish fleet was at risk of running onto the sands of Zealand because of the prevailing wind. The wind then changed to the south, enabling this fleet to sail north. The English ships under Howard pursued to prevent any landing on English soil, although by this time his ships were almost out of shot. On August 12th, Howard called a halt to the pursuit at about the latitude of the 5th of 4th off Scotland. The only option left of the Spanish ships was to return to Spain by sailing around the north of Scotland and home via the Atlantic or the Irish Sea. The Spanish ships were beginning to show wear from the long voyage, and some were kept together by having their damaged hulls strengthened with cables. Supplies of food and water ran short. The intention would have been to keep to the west of the coast of Scotland and Ireland in the relative safety of the open sea. There being no way of accurately measuring longitude, the Spanish were not aware that the Gulf Stream was carrying them north and east as they tried to move west, and they eventually turned south much closer to the coast than they believed. Off Scotland and Ireland, the fleet ran into a series of powerful westerly winds which drove many damaged ships further toward the lee shore. Because so many anchors had been abandoned during the escape from the English fireships off Calais, many of the ships were incapable of securing shelter as the fleet reached the coast of Ireland and were driven onto the rocks, which local inhabitants then looted the ships. The late 16th century, and especially 1588, were marked by unusually strong North Atlantic storms, perhaps associated with a high accumulation of polar ice off the coast of Greenland, a characteristic phenomenon of the Little Ice Age. More ships and sailors were lost to cold, stormy weather than to direct combat. About 5,000 men from the Armada died by drowning, starvation, and slaughter by local inhabitants after the ships were driven ashore on the west coast of Scotland and Ireland. The English Lord Deputy William Fitzwilliam ordered the English soldiers in Ireland to kill any Spanish prisoners, which was done on several occasions, instead of asking for ransom, as was common during that period. Reports of the passage of the remnants of the Spanish Armada around Ireland abound with onerous accounts of hardships and survival. Spanish Captain Francisco de Cuellar was wrecked on the coast of Ireland and gave a remarkable account of his experience in the fleet and all it run in Ireland. In the end, 67 ships and fewer than 10,000 men survived. Many of the men were near death from disease, as the conditions were very cramped and most of the ships had run out of food and water. Some were captured and imprisoned by the English at what was later called the Spanish Barn in Torquay on the south coast of England. More Armada survivors later died in Spain or on hospital ships in Spanish harbors from diseases contracted during the voyage. It was reported that when Philip learned of the result of the expedition, he declared, "I sent the Armada against men, not God's wind and waves." Well, guys, that is the story of the Spanish Armada, and what happened to it. Please like and subscribe so we can get the channel some more subscribers and stuff. And if you have any ideas, please comment down below. I need ideas. I really do. And I know I said in my announcements video that that I would not have space stuff on another channel. Well, I found out how to make another channel, and it's now over there. So if you want to check that out, that's called C, N, Space History. Pretty much set up in the same format. You just replace this with space. I hope you guys have a good day. Bye.